The day my son-in-law called Japanese business culture a relic of the Meiji era, I knew exactly how this was going to end. I just didn't know it would take less than 48 hours. Let me back up. My name is Harold Keating. I spent 22 years building partnerships with Japanese corporations, automotive suppliers, electronics manufacturers, precision parts companies. I started as a junior liaison at a mid-sized industrial firm in Cleveland, back when fax machines were still the fastest way to send a document overseas, and a handshake across the Pacific meant something that no contract could fully capture. By the time I hit my early 50s, I had relationships in Nagoya, Osaka, and Tokyo that had taken decades to cultivate. The kind of relationships where the other side calls you first. Not your company, not your CEO. You, personally, when something important is about to happen. That matters. I need you to understand that before anything else. The company was Hartley Industrial, no relation to me. The founder's name was on the building long before I arrived. We made precision machined components, the kind of unglamorous but essential parts that go inside things people never think about until they stop working. Bearings, housings, valve assemblies. Not glamorous. But when a Japanese automaker calls you at 6 in the morning their time because a shipment needs to be adjusted before a production line shuts down, that's when you find out what your relationships are actually worth. I had built the Asia-Pacific division from $11 million in annual revenue to just under 90, not through advertising or aggressive sales tactics, through showing up, through remembering that when our contact at Mitsukawa Manufacturing lost his father, you send flowers, you call, and you do not talk about business for the next 3 weeks unless he brings it up first. Through understanding that a dinner in Nagoya with the right people, done right, is worth more than 100 slide decks delivered over Zoom. My daughter married a man named Sawyer about 4 years ago. He's sharp. I mean that genuinely sharp, the kind of guy who can walk into a room and have the numbers memorized before anyone else finishes their coffee. He has an MBA from Northwestern, and he believes, with the sincerity of a man who has never been proven wrong in an environment that would actually test him, that efficiency is always the solution. He came to work for Hartley about 2 years after the wedding. Started in strategic development, which is a title that means different things at different companies. At Hartley, it mostly meant analyzing acquisition targets and running competitive models. He was good at it. I'll give him that. The problem started when the old man, Hartley's founder, who had largely stepped back but still held the controlling share, decided it was time to think about the company's long-term future. He brought in a consulting group to look at strategic options. The consulting group, as consulting groups reliably do, came back with a recommendation to pursue a major partnership or acquisition in the Asia-Pacific market. Specifically, they had identified Kinoshita Precision as an ideal target, a mid-tier Japanese manufacturer with complementary product lines, a strong domestic client base, and an ownership structure that made them a realistic acquisition target. The deal, if it came together, would be valued at approximately $2 billion. It would more than double our footprint in Japan and give us direct access to 3 automotive supply chains we'd been trying to crack for years. When the old man assembled the team to pursue it, he asked me to lead negotiations. That was not a surprise. I had met Kinoshita's chairman, a man named Takahiro Ozawa, at an industry conference in Detroit 9 years earlier. We'd had dinner twice since then, exchanged holiday correspondence, and he had personally called me 2 years ago when Kinoshita was considering a distribution partnership, a deal that didn't go anywhere, but the conversation had been warm and unhurried. The way conversations with Ozawa-san always were. I told the old man this is going to take time, not weeks, months, possibly over a year. Japanese acquisition negotiations, especially with a family-controlled company like Kinoshita, are not transactional. They are relational. You are not buying a company. You are being considered as a partner worthy of trust. Those are different things. He nodded. He understood. He'd been doing business long enough to know I wasn't being slow, I was being accurate. What I did not fully account for was my son-in-law's ambition. Sawyer had been quietly positioning himself for a larger role. I noticed it, but I didn't take it seriously the way I should have. He started sitting in on calls he wasn't assigned to. Started CCing himself on email threads. Started offering opinions in senior leadership meetings that weren't really invitations for his opinion, just read that way if you weren't paying close attention. About 3 months into the Kinoshita process, he presented the old man with what he called an accelerated engagement framework, a 60-page deck, data models, timelines, A phased communication strategy built around digital touchpoints, quarterly video briefings, and a proposed LOI timeline of 90 days. I heard about it secondhand from our CFO, who pulled me aside after the meeting and said, "Harold, you might want to have a conversation with the old man soon." I did. I sat down with him and I explained it plainly. Ozawa-san is not going to respond well to an LOI in 90 days. He barely knows us. The process we're in right now, the dinners, the site visits, the slow build of trust, that is the negotiation. The paperwork comes later. If we rush this, we don't just lose the deal. We damage the relationship in a way that may not be repairable. The old man listened. He thanked me. He said he understood. 2 weeks later, Sawyer was named co-lead on the Kinoshita engagement. I should have seen what that meant. I told myself it was political, that the old man was managing family dynamics, giving his daughter's husband something visible. I told myself it was cosmetic. It wasn't. The first thing Sawyer did was schedule a video call with Kinoshita's executive team, not through Ozawa-san, but directly through their corporate communications office, to introduce our digital engagement strategy and present our preliminary integration vision. I found out about the call the morning it was scheduled. I called him directly. I said, "Sawyer, you cannot do this. You cannot reach past Ozawa-san to his subordinates with a strategic presentation. That is not how this works. It will read as either disrespectful or desperate, and either way, it sets us back." He said, and I remember this clearly because I wrote it down afterward, "Harold, with respect, the Meiji era is over. Japanese business culture has globalized. You're applying a framework that's 20 years out of date. Ozawa-san is 71 years old. In 3 years he's retired, and we're dealing with a whole different generation. I'm building the relationship with the people who will actually run this company." There was nothing I could say to that which he was going to hear. So I said, "I think this is a serious mistake," and I got off the phone. The call happened. I was not on it. I heard the summary from our head of business development, who described the energy on the Kinoshita side as polite but noticeably cool. Ozawa-san was not on the call. His deputy was, and the deputy said very little. Over the next 6 weeks, Sawyer implemented the full framework. Quarterly video briefings replaced the in-person dinners I had been scheduling. A shared digital workspace was set up to streamline document exchange. A formal timeline was presented with milestone markers and a target signing date. I watched it happen the way you watch a car accelerate toward an intersection when you know the light is about to turn. Ozawa-san stopped responding to my personal emails. That had never happened before. Not once in 9 years. Then Sawyer came to me with a new development. He'd gotten word through a third-party intermediary, a consultant he'd hired who had no existing relationships with Kinoshita, that Ozawa-san was open to accelerating the timeline. He was excited. He took it to the old man as confirmation that his approach was working. I asked him one question: who told the consultant that? He didn't know exactly. Someone in Kinoshita's corporate development office, second or third hand. I told him that in Japanese business culture, when someone in a subordinate position passes a positive signal through an unofficial channel, it does not mean yes. It often means the opposite. It's a way of managing a situation without direct confrontation. It's the sound of a door being quietly closed while you're still standing in the hallway. He told me I was being negative and culturally condescending. 3 weeks after that conversation, I was called into a meeting with Sawyer and the old man. I was informed that my role in the Kinoshita engagement was being restructured. Sawyer would take full lead. I would be available as an advisory resource on an as-needed basis. I looked at the old man for a long moment. He didn't meet my eyes the way he usually did. I said, "I understand." I stood up, shook both her hands, and walked out. I did not make a scene. I did not send an angry email. I went back to my office, closed the door, and called Ozawa-san directly. He answered on the second ring, which told me something. Men want to avoid a conversation, let it go to voicemail. I told him the truth. I told him my role had changed and that I wanted him to hear it from me directly before anyone else reached out. I told him I valued the relationship we had built over many years, independent of whatever happened with the deal. I said, "Ozawa-san, whatever you decide is the right path for Kinoshita, I hope you'll remember that the friendship, at least, was real." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in the careful English he always used with me, "Keating-san, it is good to hear your voice. I have been wondering when I would." I didn't ask him what that meant. I didn't need to. I said I hoped we would have dinner again sometime, deal or no deal. He said he would like that very much. I hung up and sat there for a while. 6 days later, Kinoshita Precision's corporate communications team sent a formal letter to Hartley Industrial's executive office. The letter was written in the precise, courteous language that Japanese companies use when they are ending something gracefully. It expressed appreciation for the dialogue over the preceding months. It cited a strategic reassessment of our partnership priorities. It wished Hartley continued success. $2 billion, gone in 3 paragraphs. I heard about it from the CFO again, 40 minutes after the letter arrived, before Sawyer had even finished reading it. The executive floor was not quiet that afternoon. I could hear it from my office. Not shouting, but the sound of urgent, tense conversations happening behind closed doors. The old man's assistant was making calls. Someone from our legal team arrived, which made no sense for a deal that had never produced a signed document, but I suppose when something of that magnitude evaporates, you want a lawyer nearby anyway. Sawyer came to my office at around 4 o'clock. He sat down across from me. He looked like a man trying very hard not to look the way he felt. He said, "I don't understand what happened." I said, "I know." He said, "They gave no real reason. We were on track. The milestones were all." I said, "The milestones were on a timeline you built. They were never on a timeline Ozawa-san agreed to. That's a different thing." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is there anything we can do?" I thought about that. I thought about Ozawa-san answering on the second ring. I said, "Maybe, but not quickly, and not the way you've been approaching this." I want to be honest here. I did not enjoy that conversation the way you might expect. He's my daughter's husband. I've sat across from him at Christmas dinner. I've watched him coach my granddaughter's soccer team with a level of patience that I genuinely admire. He's not a bad person. He made the mistake that smart people with not enough experience make. He confused the map for the territory. He looked at a process that appeared inefficient and decided the appearance was the reality. But I was also not going to pretend the situation was something other than what it was. The old man called me into his office the next morning. He looked tired in the way that people look when they've spent a night understanding a mistake they can't undo. He asked me directly, was there a path back? I told him honestly, I didn't know. But if there was one, it would start with me calling Ozawa-san personally, with no agenda, no timeline, no LOI, and no framework. It would start with an acknowledgement that we had mismanaged the relationship. It would require patience, real patience, not patience as a strategy, and there was no guarantee it would lead anywhere. He asked me if I was willing to try. I said yes. He asked me what I needed. I said I needed full authority over the engagement, no co-leads, and I needed Sawyer to have no contact with anyone at Kinoshita without my explicit approval. There was a pause that lasted long enough to be uncomfortable. He said yes. I called Ozawa-san that afternoon, not to propose anything, just to talk. I asked about his family. His son had recently taken a position at a university in Kyoto, I remembered. He asked about mine. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing related to business. At the end, he mentioned, without prompting, that he was attending an industry dinner in Chicago in the spring. I said I'd look forward to seeing him there. That dinner happened about 4 months later. I flew to Chicago. I did not bring a presentation. I did not bring our CFO or our head of business development. I brought myself and a bottle of Yamazaki 18 that I'd picked up at the airport in Tokyo on a layover the previous year and had been saving for the right moment. We had dinner for 3 hours. Talked about our careers, our families, the state of the manufacturing industry, a fishing trip he was planning in Hokkaido, somewhere near dessert, he mentioned, almost as an aside. The Kinoshita's board had been asking him about long-term succession planning and what the company's future might look like outside of family ownership. I did not say anything immediate. I just nodded and said that sounded like an important conversation to be having. He agreed that it was. On the flight home, I wrote 4 paragraphs in a notebook. Not a deck, not a model, just 4 paragraphs about what a partnership between our companies could look like if it were built on the foundation we'd spent 9 years constructing. I gave it to the old man the next morning. He read it in about 3 minutes. He said, "This is it?" I said, "For now, yes." He read it again. Then he said, "Okay." Formal talks resumed 8 months after Kinoshita sent that letter. Slow, careful, structured around in-person meetings in both directions. Our team in Nagoya, their team in Cleveland. No artificial timelines. No digital engagement frameworks. Just the work of building something that would last. Sawyer remained at the company. He moved into a role focused on domestic market strategy, which is genuinely where his skills are strongest. We are polite at family dinners. My daughter knows the broad shape of what happened without knowing every detail, which is probably the right level of knowledge. She once said to me, over coffee at her kitchen table, "Dad, I know he can be a lot. Thank you for not making it into a war." I said, "He works hard and he loves his family. That counts for something." She looked at me for a moment. "But?" "No but," I said. "That's the whole sentence." The Kinoshita deal closed on a Tuesday in April, 14 months after the letter that was supposed to end it. Final valuation came in at $1.9 billion. Not the $2 billion we'd originally projected, but Ozawa-san's son was brought in as part of the leadership transition structure, which was something the family had wanted all along and which nobody had ever thought to ask about before I sat at that dinner table in Chicago and listened long enough to find out. A few weeks after signing, I got a package in the mail from Nagoya. Inside was a small lacquerware box, the kind you don't buy at an airport, and a handwritten note in Ozawa-san's careful English. It said, "For a friendship that outlasted the negotiations." I keep it on my desk. I look at it on the days when someone comes to me with a new framework for doing things faster, and I have to find the patience to explain, again, that fast and done are not the same thing. They never have been. That lacquerware box still sits on the corner of my desk, right where I can see it without looking for it. Some mornings I come in early, before the phones start, and I just look at it for a second. Not out of pride, more like a reminder of how close the whole thing came to being a very different story. I've thought a lot about what actually happened, not the deal mechanics, but the human part underneath all of it, and the honest truth is that nothing in this story was random. Every outcome traced back to something that came before it. Sawyer moved fast because he'd always been rewarded for moving fast. He discounted what he didn't understand because nobody had ever made him pay a real price for that. And I have to be honest here, I let it go further than I should have because I didn't want to make trouble in my own family. That was my failure, and it had consequences too. But here's what I kept coming back to. The thing that saved the deal wasn't strategy. It was 22 years of showing up the right way. Ozawa-san answered on the second ring, not because of any leverage I had, not because of a term sheet or a presentation, because over 9 years I had never given him a reason not to trust me. That trust was built one dinner, one phone call, one handwritten note at a time. You can't manufacture it on a timeline. You either have it or you don't, and you either earned it or you didn't. That's the part Sawyer couldn't see from where he was standing, and I don't entirely blame him for that. He's intelligent, genuinely, seriously intelligent. But intelligence without the patience to understand what you don't yet know is a tool that cuts the person holding it. He had the analytical ability to build a beautiful model of a relationship without understanding what makes a relationship real. The map is not the territory. He learned that the expensive way. What carried me through the harder parts of all this wasn't anger, and it wasn't stubbornness. It was something quieter. I kept doing the work that I knew was right, the slow work, the undramatic work. Even when I'd been pushed aside and there was no guarantee it would lead anywhere. I called Ozawa-san not because I thought it would reopen the deal, but because it was the right thing to do for a friendship I genuinely valued. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, doing the right thing for its own sake turns out to matter in ways you didn't expect. I think about that when younger people come to me now with a new system, a new shortcut, a new way of automating something that used to take time. I don't dismiss them. I listen. And then I try to ask the one question that the frameworks usually skip. What are you losing when you remove the friction? Because sometimes the friction is the relationship. Sometimes the slow part is the whole point. My daughter asked me once if I'd ever really forgiven Sawyer for what happened. I thought about it for a while before I answered. I told her that forgiveness was the wrong frame. He made a costly mistake from a place of genuine confidence in his own abilities. What I hope for him, what I still hope for him, is that he carries the lesson forward, that the $1.9 billion that almost disappeared becomes the thing that makes him a wiser person at 50 than he was at 35. That's not punishment. That's just how experience works if you're paying attention. The box from Nagoya is small enough to hold in one hand. Inside it, there's nothing, just the lacquer, the craftsmanship, the weight of something made carefully by someone who understood that how you make a thing is part of what the thing means. I keep it where I can see it.